Hi there everyone and welcome to another instalment of Harney's Practically Speaking. I'm here again, Rachel Graham. I'm a transactional partner in Harney's London office and I'm joined again by Amy Roost, one of our directors in Harney's Fiduciary. Morning Amy.
Hi there Rachel, thanks for having me.
This week we're going to have a chat about a topic which seems to be rather in the news at the moment in terms of the offshore environment, and this is the question about what to do about your BVI company when its useful life to you has come to an end. There are really two options for this, and we're going to have a little chat about the implications of both of those. The first option that people usually think of is leaving their company to essentially wither on the vine in the BVI, and this is usually known as striking off or allowing your company to fall out of good standing. The other option is a more formal process to wind up and dissolve the company formally. People usually talk about this in terms of being a liquidation. I should say that when we talk about liquidation during this podcast, we're talking about solvent liquidation. We're not looking at the insolvent court process. We'll save that joy for another day.
Yes, Rachel. So we've always encouraged clients to formally liquidate because it does, as you say, bring a formal end to the company. The strike-off route is, I like to think of it as the company being put on standby. The company could at any point within 7 years of strike-off be reinstated and it would be deemed in the eyes of the law to have never been struck off.
So it's a bit like a plane in a holding pattern, really. It's not gone, it's still there, it's hovering.
Yeah, and crucially, the liabilities continue during that time.
Is that liabilities for everyone? Is it directors primarily? But what about shareholders, for example? Might they be still liable for the company?
Typically, it would be the directors, but in the absence of directors, potentially the liabilities could extend to the shareholders too. So really, the message for clients now is really evaluate carefully what you want to do if you have decided that the entity is no longer required. As I've said, liquidation is always the message, but we have a key difference now in this strike-off cycle. We need to be very conscious that economic substance obligations continue even if a company has been struck off.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? The economic substance laws are really reaching into all different areas of companies' lives, aren't they? Because I imagine that a lot of people out there, and myself included, when the laws first came in, we just assumed that as soon as there was no further use for a company, then their obligations would end under the substance reporting regime. But I guess the key message for people there is that if a company is still on the register, which a company which has simply been struck off will still be there for another 7 years, it still has an obligation to report.
Exactly. The key thing here is any activity that's happened in the financial period. Every single BVI company is in their first financial period. Indeed, some entities have finished their financial period. An entity that is on the register at the end of their financial period is required to report for economic substance. An entity that is struck off remains on the register for 7 years after its strike off.
Gosh, so if for example, if I decide, I mean, and obviously I think that the message we're trying to get across is that it is far better for a number of reasons, but sort of pertinently in relation to economic substance reporting. It is far better if you've finished your use of the company that you take it through a formal liquidation process, appoint your liquidator who will do their usual job of collecting in the assets, settling the liabilities of the company, and then formally winding up and giving notice of completion of the liquidation to the registrar, who then will dissolve the company and strike it off the register. So what about a company that perhaps is put into liquidation during a financial period, but that liquidation process hasn't actually been completed by the end of the financial period? I guess the situation is that company is still in existence, still on the register. Would it still have to report?
Absolutely, yes. Any entity that's on the register at the end of the financial period will need to report, even if it's in liquidation or it's struck off.
So I imagine then, the liquidator's been appointed, the directors no longer have any powers. It will be part of the liquidator's duty and obligation to make sure they assist the registered agent in filing that report prior to completing the liquidation process.
Yes, absolutely, because once the liquidation is completed, the entity obviously doesn't exist anymore. So it needs to be done prior to the liquidation.
Yeah. Once it's been liquidated, been taken off the register, obligations to report finish.
Yeah. So you would report in the current period for the current period that the entity is in at the point of its liquidation, but the obligations would stop then because the entity was no longer on the register, as opposed to a struck off company where the reporting obligations would continue for the 7 years because it was still on the register.
Now, what would happen if, or what's the implication for the company, for the directors, of non-compliance with that reporting obligation? Because a lot of people will say, I don't need this company anymore. I don't want to go through the expense of a formal liquidation. I want to go down the route that I've always followed historically, which was I'm just going to stop paying my annual fees, stop paying my registered agent's fees, and eventually the company will be dissolved 7 years down the track. Now, what's the, are there any words of warning for people who want to carry on doing what they were doing before?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the penalties under the BOSS regime are not insignificant. There are both criminal and financial sanctions which the ITA can levy against that entity. Under the BVI Business Companies Act, an entity that is struck off can't actually do any business. The directors are liable in their personal capacity. That is it's really a game changer. You're absolutely right that the typical route for clients was to leave the company to be struck off. That really is not a pragmatic option anymore.
Yeah, so just to simply sort of wash your hands of the company, walk away, it is not an option, mainly because that there is a compliance regime, there is an enforcement regime, there are pretty severe penalties and criminal sanctions that could be levied against the directors of a company that's decided to go down that route.
Yes, and the registered agent would have to be contacting the entity for many years to come. You can't simply wash your hands anymore.
Thanks very much, Amy. I think it's pretty clear actually from our discussions that liquidation really is the best option for closing down a company. And the previously quite commonly used option of leaving companies to be struck off is really neither practical nor sensible, given the enforcement powers of the regulatory authorities. And directors would be well advised to consider what we've been saying and actually take further advice if they're unsure of what their options are.
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Amy. I'd hopefully see you all next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.